Okay, let's take a moment, look at the disclaimer. This content is for educational, informational, entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be taken as a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any securities at any time. We are here just to spread the word of how BTA analyze the markets, how we look at the markets, and nothing should be taken as a recommendation. This is Rod from BTA, and we are known as the middle traders. We are not going to get in at the exact bottom. We are not going to get out at the exact top, but we are going to make money, lots of it, in the middle. We are the stock market masters. And sometimes it seems as though we can see the future. Now, let's take a look at this weekly chart. This is a weekly chart of the DIA. Okay, this is a weekly chart of the DIA. And up top here, we have our Bollinger Bands. Okay, this is our Bollinger Bands right here. Then we have our RSI, we have our stochastic, and we got our MACD. Okay, so what I want to do right now is quickly go over the four major ETFs that tracks the major market indexes. Okay, and let's look at our Bollinger Band strategy, because we have been watching this for the last 3 weeks or so, and well, almost 4 weeks now, almost a month, and we have completed the setup week, the signal week, and now we're on the pivot week. Okay, so let's analyze that for a minute. So this is this week's action right here. This was the signal week right here. Okay, this was the signal week right here. And we traded just above the signal week and we pulled back. We cannot seem to get above the signal week and hold. But the RSI is above the 30 level, and it traded up to the 50, and it's kind of turning back just a little bit. The stochastic it got below 20, got back above 20, gave us the bullish crossover, and it's staying above the 20 level. So that's all good, okay? But what's troubling right now is that we can't seem to get above the signal week, the close, and basically the high of the signal week, and stay above there. Okay, we can't seem to do that. So this is the weekly chart of the DIA, right? The ETF that tracks the Dow Jones. And right now you see, if I put a vertical line, a horizontal line, right across the highs, and right at the close of the signal week, you can see that we got above it just a little bit and we pull back. And right now we're trading down below it. Okay. Now we put out a video earlier this week explaining that we were going to adjust, that we had to adjust the trading plan a little bit for the Bollinger Band strategy. Okay. So I hope everyone, when they looked at that video, that we was adjusting the trading plan a little bit because of some of the key overhead resistance that we were seeing, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. But right now, as you can see, we can't seem to get above last week's close, the close of the signal week. That's going to be our pivot. We need to get above that, but we have to also get above these key moving averages, okay, on the weekly chart, that is starting to give us some serious overhead resistance. So let's look at that. So here is the Dow Jones. This is our weekly moving averages, okay? Weekly moving average chart of the Dow Jones. So I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can see it. Okay, let me expand this. All right, so you can see it a little better. And look right here. We have this downward. We've been speaking about this for the last 3 or 4 days now, at least the last 2 days. 2 to 3 days. This is a downward trending 8-week moving average. So we got our downward trending 4-week moving average, and we got that's flattening out right below price. But we've been talking about this downward trending 8-week moving average that was acting as resistance. As you can see, last week we got right to it and closed right on it. This week, okay, the week is not finished yet, but we tried to trade above it and we pulled back. we can't see, we got to get above this downward trending 8-week moving average. What is that? Which is the green line here. This green moving average line is the 8-week. Above it, this yellow moving average line is the 13-week moving average. Okay, but now notice right here, this long-term magenta line here, this is the 100-week moving average for the DIA. We traded right down to it, almost to the T, and bounced. So it is acting as somewhat of some support right now. If we break back below that, we got to be careful. We could come down here and start trying to test these lows right here. If we break back below that, look right now. If we break below this 100-week moving average and we break back below this 4-week moving average right here, then we gotta look out. We could go back down here and test these lows. But right now, it's this downward trending 8-week moving average that is starting to be a problem, and we got this 13-week moving average here. Okay, so besides, if you go back and look at the video we did just before this one, the one we just did previously, talking about the institutional investors selling the market, we went over the daily chart. The moving averages on the daily chart, and you can see the support that needs to hold and the overhead resistance that we're having a problem getting above. So right now on the weekly chart, you can see the 8-week moving average for the DIA is definitely going to be a problem. Hopefully we can hold this 100-week moving average right here. Okay, now let's look at the structure of the chart real quick. Well, you see, let's expand this. You can see clearly we got out of the downward channel, right? We got out of this weekly downward channel right here, okay, with these trend lines. We broke above that last week. That's good. But we got right up to this overhead resistance area right here at 331.35. This is a structural chart. This is our trend lines and horizontal support and resistance levels for the DIA on the weekly chart right here. Well, we got right to just above it a little bit, and we pulled back. This 331, this area right here, this horizontal overhead resistance level is at 331.35. We closed back below that. We got to get above that. If you see last week, we closed right on it. This is pretty much the pivot area right here. We got to get above that. This is going to be our pivot area. But we also need to see ourselves get above that 8-week moving average. So we're going to wait. Even if we break above this, if we can't see ourselves closing above that 8-week moving average, all right, we're going to have to wait. We got to get above that 8-week moving average. Okay, that downward trend, the 8-week moving average is a problem. All right. So now, but right now on the weekly chart with the structure, this 331.35, this horizontal resistance level is a level of key interest. That's key interest. We got to get above that resistance level right there. Now, let's look at the SPY. We just did the DIA. Let's take a look at the SPY right now. Let's go to the SPY on the Bollinger Band chart. Okay. Let me expand this a little bit so you can see it much better. Okay, let me expand this area. I want you to be able to see this very well. Okay. As you can see here, okay, on the Bollinger Band, okay, we got above last week, which was our signal week. We closed above the lower Bollinger Band. That's great. We came up, we got down to below 30 and we got above 30 and we started moving up. We got to be careful here. We want to see prices, when prices start moving up, we need to see this RSI get above this 50 level. This is the RSI right here. This is our stochastic once again, and this is our MACD. Okay. So, but we want to see, we did get below 30 on the RSI. It did get above 30. Okay. Prices did close back within the lower Bollinger Band on the weekly chart. This is a weekly chart of the SPY, the ETF that tracks the Standard & Poor's 500. Okay. So, but the RSI, we needed to get above 50 and stay above 50. We did get a bullish crossover on the stochastic and it moved above 20. That's great. So everything is set up on the signal week. Right now we're in the pivot week, and this is our pivot. Okay. We got to get above this high right here. We got to get above that high. We have to. All right. That's our pivot. And now, once again, we're going to look at the moving averages because we need to adjust this a little bit on our moving averages, okay? Because the moving averages are starting to act as overhead resistance. But right now, the high of last week, right here, this high of last week is going to be our pivot area. We got to get above that, okay? We traded above it just a little bit this week and we pulled back, okay? But we need to see this week start trading up, and we need to see one of the days this week close above this high. If we could get one of the days this week to close above this high, that would be great. That's technically our pivot on the trading plan. We got to get that one of these days, any day this week that we can close above this high, that'll be our pivot. But, okay, all right? Don't say I didn't tell you, but, all right, we put up the videos talking about the overhead resistance on the moving averages on the weekly chart. Okay, so we gotta look at this here. Let me expand this a little bit so you can bring it down. These are our moving averages of the SPY on the weekly chart. Okay, let me expand it a little bit, and I'm gonna maximize this so we can see it a little better. Okay, so these are our moving averages on the weekly chart, and as you can see, look at the SPY, the same as the Dow. All right, the DIA. Look at it. This 100-week moving average is acting as support. Okay, I tell you what we're going to do. Look, let's go back and look at the DIA real quick. So this is a chart of the SPY. Okay, let's look at the DIA real fast. All right, once again, this 100-week moving average, right? See this 100-week moving average right here? Let me expand this so you can see it. So we're on the weekly chart right now of the DIA. All right, look at that 100-week moving average right here. We came right down to it and we traded down to it, okay? And we found support. Here's the 5-day moving average. If we start breaking below that, like I said, we may come back and test these lows. Here's the downward trending 8-week moving average, okay? So we got the 100-week and the 4-week right below it, and the 8-week moving average trending right down on it, squeezing it. That's a problem, okay? We don't want to see that. Now, let's go right back to the SPY. Okay, so you can see the DIA and the SPY looks almost identical. Here's the SPY. Let's maximize it. Let's bring it up, make it a little bigger, and let's maximize it. So let's zoom in so you can see it. See that? It looks almost identical, okay? Look at that 100-week moving average right here. Okay, look at that downward trending 8-week. Look at that 4-week right below it. We traded right down to the 100-week moving average, and we found support there. If we start breaking below that and get below this 4-week moving average right here, then we may come back down to test these lows. That's not good. We got to be careful. So the weekly Bollinger Band, we see we have to get above last week's high, last week's close. We got to close one of these days above it this week in order to take action, right? But we said we need to get above these downward trending moving averages, this 8-week moving average. So if we get above this high, maybe we can get above this 8-week moving average, and that's good. And then we got all of this support down here. This is very good support levels. And not only that these very good support levels on the weekly chart, but this is coming into very good support levels on the daily chart. So go back and look at it. It's right there. The daily and weekly chart is telling us we got key support if we can hold it. But we got to get above that overhead resistance. We got to start breaking above it. So this 8-week moving average on this weekly chart, we have to look at it. We have to keep an eye on it. If we can get above that, that's great. All right. So that's the key moving averages. Now let's look at the structure of the. Let's look at our structure chart with our trend lines and horizontal support and resistance levels. All right. I'm gonna maximize this right here so you can see it a lot better. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Okay. Look, we draw the lines on these charts almost to the T. Okay. I keep telling y'all, go back and look at the videos we got on browntradingacademy.com. Look, we've been talking about for the longest how prices almost come to our moving averages, our support and resistance levels that we draw almost to the penny. Why? Because we know how to mark up a chart. All right. We know how to mark up a chart. Look at this right now. Look how prices this week has gotten right to this here overhead resistance area. Last week prices closed right at it. That's at the 414.70 level. Right above that, we got the 418.873, and right above that one here is the 423.09. But look, we got some key overhead resistance right here on this for support resistant areas for our horizontal lines. Our horizontal lines are telling us, yo, we got to get above that. Yo, listen, if we can't get above that, it's a problem. And as soon as we get above that, we got this downward trending trend line right here coming across these highs. So can we get above this overhead resistance on these resistance levels, these horizontal resistance levels, and then break above this downward trend line above these highs? If that happened, it's a really good chance we could go right back up to 447. Okay, 447, 450 on the SPY. So look, this is key. But the first step is getting above that last week's high, which is the pivot, and then getting above these resistance areas, getting above that 8-week moving average, and then we'll reassess it from there. All right, look, we all could come up with our opinions, our thoughts, what we think should happen, what we other people say may happen, our opinions. But look, none of that means anything. Okay, none of that. It's like a butthole. Everybody got one. It don't mean anything. What matters is what the charts are telling us. What matters is what price is telling us. Price is the only thing that pays. Is price doing what you said it's going to do? Not what you think. What is price doing? Okay, that's what we analyze. So now, look, we got this overhead resistance. We got to get above it. Now, let's look at, we looked at the DIA. We looked at the SPY. Let's go to the Qs, okay? Let's go to the Qs. And we're going to go right to the Bollinger Band. Okay, we're going to go right to our chart of the Bollinger Band. And let's see what we're seeing right here, okay, with the Bollinger Band. So we can analyze our Bollinger Band strategy, right? Let's remove some of these lines, okay? Let's maximize this so we can see it better. Okay, as you can see, we did get back above. We closed below it, and we closed back. Last week we got back above the lower Bollinger Band. The RSI, which is down here, did get down to 30. That's good, and we got back above 30. The stochastics right here, it got below the 20 level. We got our bullish crossover right here, and then the stochastic got above 20. Right now it's at 22. The RSI is at 37. So that's all good. So we completed, like we said before, the setup week, the signal week, and right now, this week is the pivot week, okay? Now, right across this high, okay, right across last week's high, if I put a horizontal line right across here, boom, that's last week's high, okay? Let's snap that line right there. That's last week's high. Now, here is last week's high. That's our pivot. We need to see this week, one of the days this week, to close above this level. We have not seen it yet. Okay, that will be our signal that we can try to go long on the. This is a weekly chart, by the way, a weekly chart of the QQQs, right? So we need to see prices close above this level. We have not gotten that yet. We need to see that. If we get that, that could be our cue, right? But once again, we got an issue. Okay, let's go to our moving averages on the weekly chart. We got an issue, and we've been talking about it constantly. You've seen the same thing on the other moving averages. Let's expand this. The other ETFs, I'm sorry. Let's expand this. Look at it. That downward trending 8-week moving average. Look at that downward trending 8-week moving average. Okay, that's acting as overhead resistance. Here's the 4-week moving average line right here, the white line. Okay, so we got above that last week, but right now, this 8-week moving average, this downward trending 8-week moving average, this green line, is acting as overhead resistance. We got to get above that. So even if we close one of these days this week above last week high, that would be technically our pivot. But we said we would rather wait and see if we can get above this downward trending 8-week moving average. Can we close above that? That's going to be our true pivot, okay? Because if we can't get above this downward trending 8-week moving average, it's a problem. If we break below this 4-week moving average, which on the DIA and the SPY, we got the 100-week right down there also, we could come back and test these lows. On the Qs, we're already well below the 100-week. Here's the 100-week moving average up here. We well below that. So we got a lot of work to do on the Qs. At least the DIA and the SPY is above the 100-week moving average. We got a lot of work to do on the Qs, okay? So we got to get above that. So this 8-week moving average is the key. All right, that's the key. We got to get above that 8-week moving average. Now, let's look at the structural chart on the Qs and see what we see. So here's the Qs here. This is our structural chart on the Qs. And this is somewhat good, okay? This is somewhat good here. If you notice, last week we got above this prior resistance, this horizontal line here, this red horizontal line is at 303.50, 303.50. We closed today at 306. Okay, just a little bit above it, all right? But we traded right down this week. This week, we've been trading right down to that level, and we found support, and we bounced, okay? So can we hold this 303.50 level is the question. So we now, on this Q, if we're looking at it on the structural chart, yeah, we got above this downward trending channel right here. We got above that last week. That's clear. We got above this downward trending channel right here where prices were stuck inside of here. We got above that last week, right? That's clear. But now this week, we stuck between the high of the close, the high of last week, which is the close, which would be our pivot. Okay, that's our pivot. We stuck between that and this here support level at 303.50. So are we going to break below the support level, come back down here and test these trend lines right here, these upward trend lines? Or are we going to break above that, get above the 8-week moving average and head back up to 334? That's the question. And get above that 100-week and all the other things that's right above on the QQQs. Well, that's the question. Now, let's finish up with the IWM. No, I want to finish up today with the ITOT. So let's look at the IWM real quick, okay? So let's go back to the Bollinger Band. Okay, let's go back to the Bollinger Band. Let's clear this up a little bit so you can see it a little better. Let's expand this. Okay, let's expand this. Let's maximize it. Okay, so here's our Bollinger Band, right? So once again, last week, we closed back above the lower Bollinger Band. The RSI is well above 30. The stochastic down here gave us our bullish crossover right here, and it's above 20. So this week we is our pivot week. We got to get above this high right here. We got to get above that high right there. So if I put a vertical line, let me clear up some of that. So let me put a vertical line right here across those highs, almost right on those highs there. That's where we closed last week. So this week is our pivot week. So we need to see one day this week. We only got 2 more trading days, tomorrow, Thursday, and then Friday. We need to see one of these days it close above this here vertical line, this horizontal line we got here, which would be the close of last week. We need to see it get above that. If it closed above that, that would be technically our pivot, right? But we gotta keep an eye on those moving averages, all right? So let's go and look at the moving averages, all right? The weekly moving averages. That was a weekly chart of the Bollinger Band strategy. Let's look at these weekly moving averages. And what do we see? Be careful. We've been talking about this, okay? Look, we got that downward trending 8-week moving average once again. Bingo. We closed right on it last week. This week, we opened up above it, traded above it, and then we got right below it. Now, that's important. Let's repeat that, okay? Last week, we closed right on this downward trending 8-week moving average, the green line. This week, right here, we opened above it, traded up, and then got back below it. And now we're closing below it, okay? We only got 2 more trading days, but we did find support right at the 4-week moving average, which is this white line. We closed right on it to the penny one day this week, okay? To the penny of the 4 week. So we got that downward trend, the 8 week moving average once again. It's acting as overhead resistance. Now, look at this line right here. That's important to keep an eye on. That's the 200 week. We've been talking about the 100 week, this long-term magenta line up here. That's the 100 week. But down here, we got the 200 week moving average. This flat, white, thick, white looking line we got here is the 200 week moving average. So if we break below this 5 and we stay below this 8 week downward trend, the 8 week moving average, we could come back down here and test this 200 week moving average. Okay, if we start testing the 200 week moving average, if we don't hold, we could test these lows back here on the IWM. We don't break below the 200 week too often, and we don't get below the 100 week too often. It doesn't happen that often. So the IWM and the QQQs are not in really good position right now. Okay, they are very weak. So this 8 week moving average might just be a clue that this thing is still weak. And look at that downward trending 13 week moving average. Okay, so bottom line is we got to get above that 8 week once again. All of these major ETFs, the 8 week moving average is holding it. Okay, the 8 week moving average are holding all of them as overhead resistance. Now let's look at the structural chart of the IWM real quick. Okay, look at this here. Look at the IWM on the structural chart. I'm gonna expand this. With that 8 week moving average as resistance, well, look at this level right here, this 187.40. Okay, this 187.40 is overhead resistance for the IWM on our structural chart. We got above this downward trend line that created this channel right here. We got above this internal trend line last week. We traded right up to this red line, which is the long-term weekly resistance level at 187.40. This is the 187.40 area. We closed right on it. Well, this week we opened up right on it. We traded above it a little bit and we collapsed below it, and now we've closed below it today. Okay, so that 187.40 level on the weekly chart is a long-term structural resistance level that we got to get above on the IWM. Okay, so we see that downward trend in 8 weeks. We see the resistance levels on the structural charts that can hold us. All right, we got to be careful with that. Now let's finish up with the last ETF that tracks one of the major market indexes. That's the Itot. Okay, the Itot. My daughter, this is the ETF. This is the Standard & Poor's Total Market ETF. My daughter likes to trade this ETF. It's a little less expensive, and it tracks the total U.S. market, right? It's the S&P Total Market, Total U.S. Market ETF. So if the major market is to go up, well, this ETF is going to go up with it because it tracks the entire U.S., the total U.S. market. It's a little cheaper, and the average true range, the volatility, the average true range is not as wide. It only moves about $2 to $3 a day. Okay, so but look, here's our Bollinger Band right here. Here's our Bollinger Band. Last week we closed above the Bollinger Band, the lower Bollinger Band. So that gave us our signal week. All right, this week right here is our pivot week. Here's the RSI. We got below 30. We recycled, got above 30. On the stochastic, we got our bullish crossover right here, and the stochastic got above 20. That's great. Okay, so the Itot is sitting right on the signal week also. But let's put a line right across the pivot, right here, right across these highs. So last week closed, which it closed right on the high almost, is our pivot. Well, this week we opened up, we traded right to it. Look at it, right to that area, and we pulled back. If we close the day below it, all right? We got to get above that. That'll be our pivot. Any one of these days this week that we could close above that, that'll be great. But tomorrow and Friday is all we got left, okay? If we can't get above that this week, then we got to see what happens next week. But there's that but again. What about the key moving averages, the weekly key moving averages? So let's go to the weekly chart and look what we see. Listen, that 8 week moving average is a problem, okay? So once again, the 8 week moving average is it, okay? Look at that 8 week, look at that green line, which is a downward trend at 8 week moving average. We opened up right on it, traded above it a little bit and pulled back, and we right below it. Here is the white line is a 4-week moving average. Look at this. Right overhead is the 100-week moving average. We traded right up to it, and it pulled back. So the 8-week and the 100-week moving average on the ITOT is what we got to look out for. Okay, the 8-week and the 100-week moving average on the ITOT is what we got to look out for. So look, I like to trade the ITOT also too, especially if I want to take a small position into and I want to, if I'm long or short the overall market, and I want to make a trade in one of those directions. And sometimes I go in the ITOT first because it's not going to be as volatile. Sometimes the Qs or the IWM or the DIA, okay, or the SPY can go up and down $8, $10 in a day. And sometimes it can open up and gap down on you $4 or $5 overnight. Where the ITOT is not that volatile. It only moves like $2 or $3 all day long any given day. Okay, so if I want to get into the overall market and I want to dip my toe in there, or I want to make a trade in the overall market, but I don't want to go too deep, and I want to move in nice and slow, I like to trade the ITOT because it won't hurt you as bad. Even if we get a bad opening tomorrow morning, it only moves $2 or $3 in a day. Okay, so if it gap down or gap up, I'm not worried about the gap up. I take whatever I can get, but the gap down, if I'm long, I don't want to get hurt too bad. So the ITOT is good for something like that. But we got this overhead 100-week moving average that's acting as resistance with this 8-week downward trending moving average acting as resistance. The 4-week moving average, which is the white line, is right underneath of that support. So we got that overhead resistance we got to look out for. And look at that 13-week moving average, the yellow line, coming right down on top of all of that also. So we need to be careful. Now, let's finish up, and that'll be it. We're going to look at the structural chart of the ITOT. Okay, let's look at the structural chart with our moving averages, okay, and our trend lines. Look at that. Look at what that does right there. Look at that. Right to overhead resistance on the structural chart, and it stopped. Look at that overhead resistance right at last week highs. Look at that. Right here. Last week highs. Here's the overhead resistance. Look at that. Right at $92.38. So even if we close above that this week, we're going to go back and look at the moving averages, see if we get above those moving averages. Go back to the daily charts. We have analyzed those key overhead resistance and lowest on the daily chart, and we'll see what happened. But right here on the structural chart, 92.38 is it. We see the downward trending 8-week moving average. Okay, we see the 100-week moving average. We see the downward trending 8-week moving average. And we see the 100-week moving average right over our head. So on the ITOT, we got to get above all that. So at the end of the day, okay, to sum this all up, all of the major market, the ETF that track the major market indexes, all of them is right at overhead resistance, the 8-week moving average. And some of them are even coming right to the 100-week moving average. At the end of the day, we got to get above that 8-week moving average in order for things to look a lot better. And then if that 100-week moving average is right over the top of your head, you got to get above that. Go back and look at those videos I did on the daily chart. Write down all of those overhead resistance levels. Just write the price down. DIA overhead resistance here. SPY overhead resistance here. And write down the weekly overhead resistance level. It got to get above that. If it don't get above that, in our opinion, for us and how we trade here at BTA, we think that'll be dangerous. It got to get to go long if you don't get above all of that. This is key overhead resistance. We got to get above. You see it stopping at these areas for the last 3 days. It's been stopping at these areas. I'm telling you, as far as we're concerned here, we're going to have to pause. We're going to have to adjust our Bollinger Band, weekly Bollinger Band strategy. We got to get above this. If we could get above this, it's a go. If we can't get above this, then it's a no. Okay, on that note, I hope everybody have a good night. Keep an eye out. We're going to be analyzing this. We're going to be going over this stuff every day until something happens. We're going to be analyzing this step by step every day. So keep an eye out for the upcoming videos. Take care. Everybody have a good night.